Why are you looking at me that way? Won't I do?
Yes, you'll do very well indeed.
Well, that was gay. Actually, even the advertising agreed. I guess she does give you that weird feeling. And somehow this got released in 1936. When most people think about Universal horror, they think of Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, etc., etc. But one of the studio's most fascinating films is also one of its most overlooked. Released in 1936, Dracula's Daughter continues the story of Dracula while introducing Countess Marya Zaleska, a vampire who desperately wants to be free from her curse. Along the way, the film pushed the boundaries of what Hollywood's censorship would allow, and became one of the earliest examples of queer coding in cinema. Today we're breaking down the entire film, discussing its production history, the Hays Code, its controversial lesbian subtext, if there are any connections to the vampire novella Carmilla, and why Dracula's Daughter remains one of the most unique entries in Universal's monster legacy. Before we get started, I'm the queer ghoul Adriana Oyster, some people's favorite writer and chronically ill gender-fluid lesbian, and thank you for visiting my channel. All the links to my socials, including to my Substack, are down below in the description box, as well as other ways to support me, the channel, and my other projects, including a Buy Me a Coffee and new YouTube memberships. So grab a steak, avoid mysterious aristocrats offering paid modeling sessions, no matter how hot they are, and let's talk about Dracula's Daughter. Before we get into the film, we need to talk about how Dracula's Daughter came to exist in the first place. And no, we're not going to be talking about the birds and the bees of the monster world. By the mid-1930s, Universal had discovered something incredibly profitable. People went batshit crazy over monsters. Dracula had been a huge success in 1931, turning Bela Lugosi into a horror icon and helping establish Universal Pictures as the Mount Rushmore of cinematic nightmares. That same year, Frankenstein with Boris Karloff became another massive hit, and before long the studio had built an entire identity around creatures, mad scientists, and all of those beautiful, lovely things that go bump in the night.
Children of the night. What music they make.
So naturally, Universal wanted a sequel to Dracula. After all, the 1935 Frankenstein sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein with Boris and Elsa Lanchester, was also a box office success. There was a tiny, huge problem, though, with making a sequel to Dracula. Dracula was dead, and not just in the undead way. He actually got killed at the end of the original movie. Killed again, then? Permanently killed? Whatever you call it. At the end of the original film, Professor Van Helsing puts a stake through the Count's heart. And yeah, making a sequel after that would be a little complicated, I imagine. But has a death ever really stopped a sequel film? Hell to the no! You think Universal was gonna let that stop them? Over the next several years, various sequel ideas were developed. At one point, acclaimed horror director James Whale, the man behind Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein and 1933's The Invisible Man, was attached to the project. Different scripts came and went, including some concepts that would have brought Bela Lugosi Dracula back in the story, but nothing seemed to stick, which is incredibly sad because Bela Lugosi really wanted to come back as Dracula and didn't get the opportunity to until 1948's Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. But he did get to visit the set. Isn't that cute? Supervised parental visitation. One concept was also to adapt an omitted chapter of Stoker's Dracula novel that wasn't published until 1914 as a short story titled Dracula's Guest, but that didn't happen either. Eventually, though, Universal thought, what if the story wasn't about Dracula? What if it was about someone left behind in his shadow? That someone would become Countess Marya Zaleska, his daughter. Released in 1936, directed by Lambert Hilliser, and written by Garrett Fort, Dracula's Daughter serves as a direct sequel to Dracula, picking up almost immediately after the events of the original film. Rather than focusing on the famous Count, the movie shifts its attention to a new vampire, struggling with her own dark urges and desperately searching for a way to free herself from what she sees as a curse, while also having some daddy issues. So, vampire female version of Larry Talbot. Love you, Larry. Because of the success of The Bride, Universal also decided they want to make female counterparts to their monsters, so I'm sure that played a part in making the film about Dracula's daughter. And it's how we got other films like 1940's The Invisible Woman and 1946's She-Wolf of London, both of which I've covered already on this channel. The director Hilliser is best known for being an expert of westerns and directing other films like 1935's Guard That Girl and 1937's Girls Can Play. Hell yeah, they can. 1931's Dracula was directed by Todd Browning, but by this time his reputation was unfortunately damaged because of his 1932 film with MGM, Freaks. So I'm sure they were quick to pass on him, unfortunately. The writer Fort also wrote the scripts for 1931's Dracula, based off the novel from Bram Stoker, 1931's Frankenstein, based off the novel from Mary Shelley, and 1940's The Mark of Zorro. Bringing Countess Zaleska to life is Gloria Holden. Holden was in films like 1937's The Life of Amelia Zola and Todd Browning's 1939 film Miracles for Sale. Dr. Garth, the psychiatrist, is played by Otto Kruger, who is known for films like Hitchcock's 1942 film Saboteur and 1952's High Noon. The character Janet Blake is played by Margaret Churchill, who also did another horror film in 1936 with Boris Karloff called The Walking Dead. The lady, Lily, who caught the attention of the Countess in the scene we saw at the beginning of this video, was played by Nan Gray, who also appears in 1940's The Invisible Man Returns. And the only character to appear in this film who was in the original is Professor Van Helsing, or in this film, Professor Von Helsing. No idea why, never explained. I don't know if the writer forgot. Again, played by Edward Van Sloan, who was also in 1931's Frankenstein and 1932's The Mummy. Hollywood's first gossip queen, Hedda Hopper, also has a small role in this film, so that's awesome. Now with all of that established, let's get into the film. Two policemen are going down the stairs of Carfax Abbey. Remember, this takes place right after the events of 1931's Dracula. The American one, not the Spanish one. They find the corpse of Renfield, obviously not Dwight Frye. Also, when he was killed in the original film, he fell off the side of the stairs, but the policemen find his body directly in front of them. Professor Von Helsing emerges, and the policemen discover the body of Count Dracula with a stake through his chest. Really? You had Bela Lugosi on set and you decide to use this damn rubber thing instead? Jesus Christ. Also, when Helsing stabs him in the original film, it's just a thin piece of wood, not this damn thick thing sticking out of him. What the hell? Von Helsing is casually admitting that he killed the undead Count Dracula, and they arrest him, saying that this is a case for Scotland Yard. How? This is Whitby. I'm pretty sure Whitby police would handle it before London Scotland Yard. London is 5 hours away when I googled it. Did they want to get Sherlock Holmes in on the action in this movie? Also, yes, while this set looks like the end of the original Dracula, it is not. Universal frequently reused set pieces over and over and over again, and they just recreated it. The Commissioner of Scotland Yard, Humphrey, is interviewing Von Helsing, and he's not believing in vampires or the supernatural, and he's saying a jury would have a hard time believing it as well. Couldn't the Commissioner verify his reports of people being found dead and drained of blood if he actually did his job and looked into it?
Professor, whom have you decided to retain for your defense?
There is only one man who might understand.
Dr. Seward? Jonathan Harker? Mina?
My friend Jeffrey Goff.
What? Who? Why? What? Also, where in the hell are these people from the original film? Did they just vanish off the face of the earth? Realistically, the policemen would have ran into Harker and Mina in the Abbey. At the Whitby police station, the comedic relief policeman from earlier is terrified about being left with the dead bodies of Dracula and Renfield. For the other policeman has to meet the train for the arrival of Scotland Yard for the bodies. During this scene, they each hear sounds and go into the cell with the bodies, and the ground below is moving. But it's okay if you forget about it, because this part is never explained or revisited ever again. Lovely. Now by himself, a mysterious woman enters the jail. She requests to see the body of Count Dracula to verify for certain that he's dead. When the policeman won't let her, she hypnotizes him with her ring. When the other policeman comes back with Scotland Yard, they find the policeman stunned and the body of Dracula gone, with a terrifying howl in the distance. We see somewhere in the woods, the woman is burning the body of Dracula while saying some sort of prayer. She even raises a crucifix, although she does turn away from its sight. I love the music playing in this scene, by the way. She tells her sidekick Sander, who is keeping watch, that at last she is free to live in the light of the living instead of the shadows of the dead. Sander isn't so sure, and they head back to London. She lives on top of a bookstore. That is my kind of lady. The next night, she plays the piano, gleeful that the spell is broken with Dracula being dead, and she can now live a normal life. But the more Sander talks, the more she realizes that nothing has changed, and she goes back out for the night, where she picks up a quick bite to eat, before going back home before daylight and sinking into her lovely coffin. Doctors look over that little snack she had and confirm that he's dead from loss of blood, with 2 puncture marks in his neck. We then finally meet this psychiatrist, Dr. Jeffrey Garth, who's on vacation, but not anymore because his assistant Janet says that he's getting his ass back to London now to help his friend Von Helsing. Von Helsing explains the situation to Garth. We learn that Garth was a student under Von Helsing. Similar to the commissioner, he believes there's no jury who would believe him. Regardless, he's going to help Von Helsing out anyway. I also give kudos to Von Helsing, for standing his ground on the truth. I'm also wondering if Van Helsing and Von Helsing are both products of different dimensions and time loops. Perhaps this movie takes place after the events of Dracula, but in a different version of the film. Not even the Spanish one. We are then taken into the lovely party of Lady Hedda Hopper, where Garth is admiring a portrait done by a charming Hungarian artist named Countess Marya Zaleska, who is announced right at that moment. And this gorgeous woman captures the attention of everyone in the room, regardless of gender. Janet is not happy with Garth looking either.
Sherry, Maria?
Thank you, I never drink wine.
She said it! She said the thing!
I never drink. Why?
Like father, like daughter. The party ends up talking about the Von Helsing and Dracula situation. The Countess taking notes, especially when Garth says he believes vampires are a disease of the mind, and an obsession that can be cured. The Countess wants to talk further, and she schedules an appointment. And Janet is not happy with this. She even tied his tie crooked. While at the Countess's flat, Garth comments about the lack of mirrors. She even teases to him about a legend that says vampires can't be seen in mirrors. They're interrupted by Janet playing a joke on the phone.
Please come right away. This is the zoo speaking.
The what? The zoo?
Yeah, one of our elephants is seeing pink men.
The Countess says she needs Garth's help, that someone or something dead is influencing her to act on horrible impulses. He gives her some groundbreaking advice. The power is all in her mind. She needs to confront this influence. Then she shall be free from it. He gets another phone call believing it's Janet and ends up offending Dr. Beamish from the hospital, who called because he's needed. The Countess says that she can't see him during the day, but they agree to see each other the next night. Meanwhile, she performs a test, as Garth suggested. Sander picks up who I believe is meant to be a prostitute, or just a young woman down on her luck, I don't know, encouraging her to come with him, for his master is an artist in need of models, and she will be fed. The Countess is kind with her, encourages her to warm up, noticing the blood is gone from her hands. I mean, so my hands too, I got that circulation issue. And she starts asking the girl, Lily, weird questions. We then see this.
I'm ready now. I suppose you'll want these pulled down, won't you?
Yes. Finish your wine, it'll warm you. Stand by the fire for a moment. You mustn't catch cold.
Why are you looking at me that way? Won't I do?
Yes, you'll do very well indeed. Do you like jewels, Lily? This is very old and very beautiful. I will show it to you.
I don't think I'll pose tonight. I think I'll go if you don't mind. Please don't come any closer.
So the test proves disastrous. I would have been dead. I would have allowed that woman to do anything she wanted with me. The next day, Garth is not happy with Janet, who gives him her resignation, though he's still going to make her work. For they have an unusual case, and we learn that Lily is not yet dead. He soon figures out that she is under hypnosis, and before she went unconscious, she said something about a woman. Garth is starting to believe that what Von Helsing has been talking about is the truth. Von Helsing is still like, I told you, vampires. But it's not Dracula. He's dead. Dead. Von Helsing tells Garth that if he finds out where the attack took place, he'll have his vampire. There will be a box with dirt from their homeland in it. That night, Janet says she's changed her mind on that resignation. Out of spite, he has Nurse Peabody tie his tie for him, but she's not sure either. Nurse Peabody is played by Ellie Malin, who people may remember playing Hannah in 1946's She-Wolf of London. Janet ends up doing it for him, and correctly this time. Janet goes to leave, but meets the Countess at the door and tells her that Garth isn't there, although her lie is immediately discredited.
I'm sorry, he's just left. Oh. May I go to supper now, Dr. Garth?
Yes, by all means, go ahead.
Why was it necessary to lie?
Honesty is the best policy. The Countess tells Garth that she can't go on without him, for he is the only thing that separates her from total destruction. She's vague when she speaks, but Garth is starting to catch on. He brings out the machine he's going to use to bring Lily out of her hypnosis, as it may induce hypnosis. Maybe he could use it on her. It has mirrors. She's like, hell no, and asks him to come with her back to Transylvania immediately. She needs him to save her soul. He's notified that Lily is ready and requests her to stay put until he gets back. Janet and the Countess confront each other again, and with Sanders' help, they kidnap her. Couldn't she have just hypnotized her, then had Sander carry her to the car? No? Okay. Garth gets Lily out of her hypnosis where she recounts the attack, where it took place, panics, and unfortunately dies. Garth comes out of the room and finds the Countess gone. He visits the Countess's flat and uses the phone to call the Commissioner, where we get another comedic relief scene.
Now get me my heavy top coat and revolver. I'm going out after vampires.
Vampires?
Vampires! Ha, ha, ha!
But I always understood you went after them with checkbooks, sir.
Hobbs, don't be facetious.
No, sir.
Everything is bare, but the Countess is still there, and Garth confronts her about the murders. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge how she immediately killed the man, but she kept Lily alive. I do wonder, though, what became of that policeman. Is he still frozen? I don't think she sucked his blood. So maybe they worked him out of his hypnosis and he survived? I don't know, that's not explained. She tells him she needs him to help her be released from the curse of the Draculas. For she is Dracula's daughter.
I am Dracula's daughter.
The shock. I'm sure audiences were shook at that revelation. Who could have known? The Countess teases him if he knows where Janet is, and phones the party she was supposed to be at, but he figures out that that's not the case. The Countess then disappears, leaving behind Janet's handbag where her coffin used to be. Von Helsing is shook that Dracula has a daughter. The Commissioner is mind blown at these revelations of vampires, and he puts out an alert for Janet. And then we get one of those broadcast montages of announcements and headlines and typewriters and telephone wires and printing presses. It was mentioned earlier in the film that she's the daughter of a baroness. I think that's what it is. I can't quite hear it right in the scene. So that's probably why she has these extravagant modeling photos. Von Helsing and the Commissioner learn that the Countess has taken an airplane to Transylvania. Finally, they ask themselves, where's Garth at? Turns out he's on a charter plane too for Transylvania. How did you get a coffin on a charter plane? Which means they all have to haul ass to Transylvania. I like how they don't even treat Von Helsing like a prisoner. He just turns into the Commissioner's sidekick. Cue finding airplanes in the sky montage. When did we start taking planes to Transylvania? When did we stop taking a ship? These kids always think they know better. We're now in Transylvania and the villagers are partying and celebrating a wedding, but the cheerful music is interrupted by the howling of wolves, as the Countess is now inside Dracula's castle, awakening from her coffin. They don't seem to be aware the Count is dead, but they seem to know he has a daughter. daughter. The Countess tells Sander that she kept Janet alive and unharmed because it was the only way to get Garth to the castle, his life exchanged for hers, as he will live with her for eternity. Yeah, I don't know if this is the person that I want living with me for eternity. Sander is peeved by this because she promised him eternal life, and warns that if Garth comes, he will only be met with death. We get another gay scene as the Countess's mouth comes closer to Janet's throat. Garth arrives at the castle and is greeted by one of Sander's wooden stake arrows. He runs up the stairs we saw Renfield go up in the first film. Again, not the same set, it was recreated just like in the beginning of this film. That dude has brought a gun to a supernatural fight. Nice homage to Bela. The Countess again confronts Garth. She informs him that her hypnosis is older and more powerful than anything he understands, and it can only be broken by her or death. And Janet's pulse is growing weaker, so the policeman probably died or is still hypnotized. She explains the whole his life for hers thing, and he agrees to it, finally acknowledging the love he has for Janet. And right when the Countess begins to turn him, Sander shoots an arrow into her, and she dies. Sander tries to shoot Garth, but he's gunned down by our other good guys. Janet awakes like Sleeping Beauty, and they embrace. Von Helsing confirms that the Countess is dead because of the wooden stake through her heart, which I kind of think is a stretch because it doesn't look like the arrow hit her chest. It looked a little low for that. Her face is still, and she almost looks like she's in peace. Von Helsing says she looks the same as she did in life when she died 100 years ago. The end. He didn't even know Dracula had a daughter, so how does he know when she died? Did I mention I love older women? I'd like to know how she is Dracula's daughter. In the beginning, the Countess alludes to her mother, and Von Helsing says Dracula was around 500 years old. Is she Dracula's biological daughter, or a daughter like an adopted and/or stepdaughter? What confuses me is, when I picture a biological daughter of Dracula, I'm picturing someone who probably is born undead. But they make it sound like she got to a certain age and then died. So did something happen that when she got to a certain age, Dracula turned her because he felt parental towards her? I don't know, also not explained. Or was she born a vampire and stopped aging once she got to a certain age? Open to interpretation, I suppose. It's not a bad film. Is it better than the original? Hell no. It can be argued, and honestly, it's probably universally agreed upon, that Bride of Frankenstein is a sequel that's better than its predecessor, which is a rare as hell accomplishment that this film unfortunately doesn't meet. Toy Story 2 met it though. Bride of Frankenstein elevated the story of Frankenstein from the original film. I think the film would have been better if it were a sequel and not a direct sequel. The tone wasn't there, and there's too many inconsistencies. The original 1931 Dracula had that darkness throughout, no score other than the haunting opening of Swan Lake. And yes, it had humor in it, but it wasn't a whole B-plot like what's going on in Dracula's Daughter. Also, I don't understand the name change from Van to Vaughn unless this is a Helsing in another timeline, or the writer just straight up forgot and they just went along with it. I don't know why Harker or Seward or Mina didn't get so much as a mention. Realistically, you wouldn't have some random student be your defense to the events you're accused of. You'd have someone who was with you when it all happened, who experienced it with you. I don't really understand how the policemen even decided to investigate the Abbey unless they unfortunately heard questionable sounds. It was cool to see Van Von Helsing again and to have him appear in Dracula's castle. I think that was a cool full circle moment, although that experience was super short, but I felt like he wasn't as important in this story as he was in the original. He probably didn't even need to be in it. It would have been better maybe if they changed up his role in the film, how he came to be in the story. I had the idea that maybe the film would have been better if it were from the perspective of both the Countess and relatives or friends of Renfield. I know it's been done before, but maybe he has a brother who investigates what the hell happened to his brother at the same time as the Countess tries to release herself from her father's vampirism. That could have been cool. And Van Helsing could have assisted in the endeavor for the Countess and the Renfields. Man, that does sound like a more interesting story. Maybe I am good at writing. Who knew? We can only wonder what film we could have got and how much gayer it would have been if James Whale stayed on the project. But enough about the negatives, let's look at the positives. Gloria Holden killed it. Killed them and killed her role. She made for such a great female vampire. Her eyes are so full of mixed emotions of tragedy, seduction, terror. You sympathize with her, fear her, and are aroused by her. Her voice and her presence are just so haunting. She's a memorable character. Maybe she deserves her own comic limited series if you're listening, Skybound and Image Comics. The themes in the film come in so clear to me, not only from an LGBTQ+ position, but from a disability and chronic illness position as well. The Countess goes through life hating herself, believing herself to be something wrong and vile. She even goes to see a psychiatrist in order to desperately cure herself, although the truth is that she can't. Your only choices are to accept it or go through life continually denying what or who you are. Those who know me know that I love viewing werewolves as an allegory for chronic illness, but easily a vampire could be as well. They follow certain restrictions and requirements in order to keep roaming the earth, including avoiding light and the sun and mirrors, resting in a box with soil from their homeland, and feeding on blood. Sander also makes for one of the better Universal monster sidekicks. You wonder what his motives are throughout. She wishes for happiness and he denies it. He's her shadow reminder of walking darkness. A devoted assistant because he wants something, of course. As for the other characters, excluding Von Helsing, they're okay. This was around the time where studios started incorporating theories of psychology into their films, and I love psychology, so I was here for it. But I can't say I came out of this film in love with Garth or Janet or the Commissioner. The Butler had more of an impact on me, honestly. Didn't I just say I'd look at the positives? Sorry. Universal reported that Dracula's Daughter was a moderate success at the box office. I did enjoy some of the parts with music. The sets were awesome and creepy. It was cool that the movie revisited places that we saw in the original film. I'd say it's worth watching the 1 hour and 11-minute runtime. After all, Dracula's Daughter is part of the legacy of the Universal monsters, and an equally important film in the history of queer cinema. Now that we've gone through the film itself, let's talk about the thing that shaped almost every Hollywood movie released between the 1930s and the late 1960s, and is something I've mentioned in previous videos: the Hays Code. Officially known as the Motion Picture Production Code. The Hays Code was a set of censorship guidelines adapted by the American film industry in 1930. It was named after Will H. Hays, the president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, although the actual code was largely written by Catholic publisher Martin Quigley and Jesuit priest Father Daniel Lord. The code was created during a period when Hollywood was facing growing criticism from religious groups, politicians, and moral reform organizations. Many people believed movies were becoming too violent, too sexual, too scandalous. There were even concerns that the federal government might step in and censor films directly. Hollywood was like, hell no! Hollywood's solution was essentially, we'll censor ourselves before somebody else does. For the first few years, the code existed, but studios mostly ignored that shit, leading to what's now known as the pre-code era. A brief period from roughly 1930 to 1934 when Hollywood films could be surprisingly provocative. You had movies featuring sexual innuendos, extramarital affairs, criminals as protagonists, strong independent women, and themes that would later become nearly impossible to depict under strict code enforcement. Then, in 1934, this all changed. The Production Code Administration was established under Joseph Breen, and he didn't play. And from that point forward, studios couldn't simply release whatever they wanted. Scripts were reviewed before filming, films were reviewed before release, and movies that violated the code risked being denied distribution. Putting it simply, if the code didn't approve of your movie, audiences probably weren't going to see it. The code contained a long list of restrictions, but several principles sat at its core. Movies could not lower the audience's moral standards. Crime could not appear attractive or rewarding. Be gay, do crime. Authority figures had to be respected, and religious institutions could not be ridiculed. I want to throw up. Sexuality had to remain heavily restricted, and perhaps most importantly, wrongdoing generally had to be punished. This is one of the reasons so many classic films from this period end with villains dying, criminals being arrested, or morally questionable characters facing consequences. The audience could witness sinful behavior, they just couldn't be encouraged to admire it. And then there was the infamous prohibition against what the code called sex perversion. That phrase was intentionally vague, but within Hollywood, everyone understood that homosexuality fell under that category. The LGBTQ+ community has always been here, after all. As a result, openly gay characters were effectively banned from mainstream American cinema for decades. Filmmakers who wanted to include queer characters had to do so indirectly. Instead of saying a character was gay, they would imply it through dialogue, mannerisms, relationships, wardrobe choices, or visual symbolism. This became known as queer coding, and horror turned out to be one of the genres where queer-coded characters appeared most frequently, partly because horror was already dealing with outsiders, social anxieties, forbidden desires, and people who existed outside accepted norms. Who knew? Which brings us back to Countess Zaleska. Whether you interpret her as explicitly queer or not, it's easy to see why so many viewers have connected her story to queer experiences. She's consumed by desires she doesn't want. She seeks treatment in hopes of changing herself. She struggles with feelings she believes are wrong. And ultimately, she isn't allowed to have a happy ending. Now, it's important to be careful here though, because the Hays Code never literally stated that gay characters had to die. That's a common misconception. What it did require was that characters associated with behavior considered immoral could not be shown as ultimately successful or rewarded. Because homosexuality itself was considered unacceptable under the code, queer-coded characters often ended up dead, defeated, imprisoned, institutionalized, or otherwise denied happy resolutions. It's a pattern you'll see over and over and over again through classic Hollywood. There are some dark queer-coded films from this period. An example of a lesbian character who survived the code is Theodora in 1963's The Haunting, which is Robert Wise's adaptation of Shirley Jackson's very lesbian novel, The Haunting of Hill House. Wise and Theodora's actress Claire Bloom were aware that this character was a lesbian, and they were going to make it known to the audience in every possible way. And the characters in the story are aware that she's a lesbian. She wasn't portrayed as a predator either. And Theodora survives at the end of the movie. Please check it out. It's one of my favorite movies, from one of my favorite books, from one of my favorite authors.
Be ready in a jiffy. How did you know I brought new clothes?
You wear your thoughts on your sleeve.
Anyway, that's better than my heart.
Despite all of these restrictions, the subtext in Dracula's Daughter still comes through remarkably clear. The censors reportedly expressed concerns about aspects of the script, particularly the implications surrounding Zaleska's interactions with women. Universal toned down certain elements, revised portions of the screenplay, and relied heavily on suggestion rather than explicit statements, especially when it comes to the sexual vampire blood-sucking. That's why we got The Ring now that hypnotizes people. But the film never completely loses what it's trying to communicate. In fact, you could argue that the censorship makes the movie more interesting, because filmmakers couldn't simply tell audiences what was happening, they had to communicate it through atmosphere, performance, and implication. And nearly 90 years later, we're still discussing it. The Hays Code itself would remain in place until the late 1960s. By that point, American culture was a changing, filmmakers were increasingly challenging censorship, and the code was becoming impossible to enforce. In 1968, it was officially replaced by the MPAA ratings system, the system that eventually gave us ratings like G, PG, PG-13, and R. So when you're watching the Universal monster movie that is Dracula's Daughter, you're also watching a film created during one of the most heavily censored periods in Hollywood history, where filmmakers often had to communicate their most interesting ideas without ever being allowed to say them out loud. Most people are aware that Universal's Dracula is based off the novel by Bram Stoker. The same Bram Stoker who in 1872 wrote a rather gushing fan letter to poet Walt Whitman that he didn't mail until 4 years later, and in it said 4 times to place the letter into the fire without reading any further if this is a mistake. Most people believe Stoker's Dracula to be the real first piece of vampire literature, and they would be wrong. Published in 1872, Carmilla is a gothic vampire novella written by Irish author Sheridan Fanu, which predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by 25 years. And while Count Dracula would eventually become the most famous vamp in literature and a household name, many of the ideas we associate with vampires today actually appeared in Carmilla first. For the gays who may not know, Carmilla has also inspired a loosely based Canadian web series adaptation in 2014 that you can watch for free on YouTube. A 2025 novel Hungerstone by Kat Dunn, which is meant to be a feminist retelling of Carmilla. And Sarah Century also has a fantastic zine with her writings about lesbian vampires. I don't know if it's actually still available, but you can check her out on Instagram. Look at how cool that is. I highly recommend you check out all of these. The story Carmilla follows a young woman named Laura, who lives in an isolated castle with her father. One day, a mysterious woman named Carmilla arrives under unusual circumstances and begins living with them. At first, Carmilla appears charming, beautiful, and somewhat fragile. Then things start becoming queer. Laura becomes increasingly fascinated by her new companion. Carmilla displays intense affection towards her. Young women in the surrounding area begin falling ill and dying. And eventually it's revealed that Carmilla is actually a vampire feeding on her victims while forming emotional and romantic attachments to them. For the modern reader, the queer themes in Carmilla are difficult to miss. Unlike Dracula's Daughter and earlier films, which had to navigate Hollywood censorship, Carmilla's attraction to women is much more direct. The novella contains numerous passages describing emotional intimacy, fascination, desire, and physical affection between Carmilla and her female victims. This is a huge reason why Carmilla is frequently cited as one of the foundational works of lesbian vampire fiction. Now, to be clear, Dracula's Daughter is not an adaptation of Carmilla. There's no evidence that Carmilla was even a thought when this movie was being conceived. The film is officially connected to Dracula and draws its story from the aftermath of Stoker's novel and the film adaptation. However, once you start comparing the two, the similarities become pretty obvious. Both stories center on female vampires. Both feature relationships between women that carry clear romantic or sexual undertones. Both explore desire through the lens of gothic horror, and both present their vampire characters as figures who are simultaneously sympathetic, threatening, seductive, and tragic. And they're both gay. The biggest difference is the era in which they were created. Fanu was writing Victorian Gothic fiction in the 19th century. Universal was making movies under that damn Hays Code in the 1930s. Carmilla could be relatively direct for its time. Dracula's Daughter had to communicate many of the same ideas through implication and subtext. In a strange way, that makes Dracula's Daughter feel like a descendant of Carmilla, even though the film never officially adapts the novella. And that connection would become incredibly influential. Over the following decades, filmmakers would return to the concept of the female vampire again and again and again and again. Many of these stories would draw heavily from Carmilla, while others would owe just as much to Countess Zaleska and Dracula's Daughter. Together, these two works helped establish the female vampire as one of horror's most enduring and homosexual figures. A character capable of being terrifying, tragic, seductive, and sympathetic all at the same time. Also, can I just say, we need a really great Carmilla film adaptation. I mean, look what Robert Eggers did for Nosferatu. We should have a Carmilla like that. So, thanks to the Hays Code, whether Dracula's Daughter is a queer vampire movie is something that couldn't be answered directly. What we do know is that audiences have been picking up on the Countess's attraction to women for 90 years now. We know the censors were concerned about it. We know the film contains one of the most discussed scenes in classic horror and film history. And we know that Countess Zaleska remains one of the most fascinating characters Universal ever put on screen. Dracula's Daughter may not be the scariest Universal film, or the most famous, or the most influential, but it's certainly one of the most unique. The film exists in this strange space where the things it isn't allowed to say often become more interesting than the things it does. And when you place it alongside works like Carmilla, it's easy to see why Dracula's Daughter has become such an important film in both horror history and queer film history. But what do you think? Do you think Dracula's Daughter deserves its reputation as one of the earliest queer horror films? Or do you think modern audiences are reading something into the movie that was never intended? Please let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments. Well, not all of them, but you know what I mean. Again, I'm Adriana Oyster, and thank you so much for visiting my channel. I appreciate all of you so much. All of my social links are down below in the description box, including my Substack, as well as other ways to support me and my other projects, including Buy Me a Coffee and my new YouTube memberships. And if there's a book, a film, a TV show, etc., that you'd like to see me cover in the future, please don't hesitate to let me know in those comments. And until next time.
Sherry, Maria?
Thank you. I never drink wine.